Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal? Indeed,
we do. We've got Zed Jelani on to talk about the president going after the 1619 project. We also have Glenn Greenwald on talking about the Julian Assange trial, which has been completely uncovered by anyone in the media.
We might be the first people to cover it. So.
But we want to start with the state of the stimulus negotiations, or lack thereof.
Yeah, so what's happening right now on Capitol Hill is absolutely incredible, given the state of the U.S. economy right now. Senate Republicans are going to vote through their package, if you can call it that. It's basically a program masquerading as a package. Mitch McConnell announced yesterday that the Senate Republicans have been trying for months to deliver it, but Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer have blocked us.
People are so shameless.
Look, it is true on both counts. It's one is lying and the other one is. Look, there's a lot going on here. But the real scandal, I think, is what's inside this thing. So there's no stimulus checks. Mm-hmm. The total worth of the package is only $300 billion. Now, that is, let's just say, not a lot of money. I mean, that is barely the size of the Paycheck Protection Program that was originally passed in March, okay? So no state and local bailouts. There's not even a pretense of trying to offer stimulus packages. There's no unemployment insurance. There's basically almost nothing that's within the bill. It's meant to be a quote-unquote negotiation position with the Democrats. But at this point, I mean, we've talked about this. Pelosi and Schumer are far more content to just say, hey, let it burn until Election Day, because Trump is going to own it at the end of the day. Unemployment, the lack of unemployment is beginning to run out. The implementation on his executive order has been pretty much a disaster and hasn't shown up. Aggregate wages and income for American families is dramatically dropped, despite the fact that we do have the eviction moratorium. Things are beginning to get quite dire. I think a month or two from now, with that lack of unemployment, a lack of stimulus checks, or anything that is coming out of Congress is really going to catch up to people.
There's a Morning Consult poll that came out, I believe last week, that showed of people who are unemployed, the number who now say they cannot cover their basic expenses, nothing additional than food and housing, has skyrocketed up to 50%.
That's right.
When those when the full unemployment benefits were in place, that number was actually quite low. So that spells out the sort of dire state of the economy. Just to give you some of the details of what is actually in the bill, this is from the Washington Post. They say it includes some money for small businesses, enhanced unemployment insurance. I think they're proposing $300 a week, some childcare, some post office, some coronavirus testing, and schools. But to your point, we can throw this Jeff Stein tweet up here because he, of course, pointed this out. He's always on the direct check beat. The Democrats and President Trump and 80% of the American public had agreed on these $1,200 stimulus checks. This was the one thing that in the last negotiations, everyone was like, okay, cool, we're going to do another round of those to make sure to tide people over. That's nowhere to be found here. And also, to put it in perspective, the last time when they were actually negotiating before the president kind of took the pressure off by issuing these executive orders, which ultimately didn't do anything, the package that had been offered by Mnuchin was up to $1.5 trillion. Yes. I mean, this is nowhere near what they had been talking about before.
The original one was $1.1 trillion. But as we said at the time, what was part of the issue? Even that $1.1 trillion was too much for many of these Senate Republicans. So they had to scale this thing down to $300 billion.
And they're still not sure that they have the whole caucus on board, by the way.
Rand is going to be like, what are we, Bernie Sanders socialists trying to spend $300 billion in a $5 trillion hole that we have? Look, this is complete insanity. It's a electoral disaster to try and offer just $300 billion in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. I cannot believe we only had one round of stimulus checks go. I genuinely cannot believe that we've been sitting here for 6 months in the middle of a pandemic. Everybody in Washington, except apparently these Senate Republicans, agrees that we need to do it. Can't get done. It's a presidential failure too, though, because if Trump was actively involved in this and made it so it's like, if you vote against the stimulus package, you're voting against me and you're voting against my voters, every single one of these people would fall
100%. It would get done, no doubt about it. And that's a part of it, obviously on the economic logic, it's cruel, immoral, and insane. But on the political logic, it's completely upside down.
Right.
Democrats have been begging you to spend a bunch of money and give out free checks to the American people right ahead of an election. it's completely upside down that it would be the Democrats pushing for this big package that actually electorally does not benefit them, which is why they aren't going to come to the table on anything less than what they originally demanded, the dynamics of which were clear from the beginning. And the Republicans are like, we don't really want to spend anything. Maybe we'll give you a few crumbs and a few pennies, but that's it. We'll draw the line. Electorally, it's completely insane.
The dirty secret here is that the Republicans don't actually want to pass anything, right? Like they're much more comfortable offering some pittance $300 billion thing. Be like, look, I voted for one of the largest rescue packages in American history, and then these Democrats are the ones who destroyed it. And you can see, I mean, I don't know if we threw this up there, but Pelosi and Schumer already poo-pooed the idea. They're like, no, it's headed nowhere. It's not going to happen, which means what's going to happen? Nothing. So why are these people even here in town in the first place? At the same time, you got these clowns like Larry Kudlow, who went on television and who is offering, from what I have heard and I had seen publicly, is that Larry Kudlow, Stephen Moore, and many others who are close to the White House are perfectly fine without having another stimulus bill. Why? Because the economy is regenerating itself through its natural market forces. He basically said that yesterday on Fox News. Let's take a listen.
We are in a self-sustaining recovery. Besides the jobs, we're in a housing boom, we're in autos boom, we're in a consumer spending boom. Inventories are at rock bottom. They're going to be rebuilt. Small businesses have greater confidence. No, the economy is rebounding. It's V-shaped. It's going to be at least 20% in Q3 and probably Q4.
How do you say that, right? It's just like what world are you living in? Granted, this is the person who said the financial crisis wasn't going to happen, has been wrong since like 1981.
And what was his coronavirus is under control or whatever?
Contained in early February, which is a real genius move.
That was great.
House.
That was a great moment.
I mean, why trot this man out there in the middle of this pandemic? The economy is regenerating. Tell that to people who are down 20% on their wages. Like, as we covered, it's not V-shaped, it's K-shaped, which is that the upper 20 percentile doing just fine, actually making more money. People are paying down debt. A lot of them don't have commuting expenses. Things are great. The bottom half of Americans down at least 20% in aggregate wages. 1/5 amongst a population that could not afford even a 1/10 break at the time and needed a raise at the time. So that's the reality of what's happening in America today. They don't want to speak about it. The whole inventory, the small business, it's total nonsense. Yeah, consumer confidence rebounds from an all-time low in April. Like, that's not something to brag about.
Consumer confidence is actually extraordinarily low right now. That's one of the things that we've been tracking, is the difference between CEO confidence and consumer confidence. Massive gap. I don't know what small business index he's looking at, but the numbers we've looked at is like 40% of small businesses facing potential closure. So I'm not sure where he's getting those numbers from, but this is the guy. I mean, this is the one they chose to highlight at the RNC. He's the one they love to put on TV. He's clearly the one that's driving this sort of approach right now, because we're really not hearing anything from the White House as far as pushing forward on a stimulus. They did do the eviction moratorium. I want to give him credit for that. That was important.
It's good.
Not a silver bullet. It's going to create a sort of financial cliff in December, but absolutely important for keeping people in their housing. But I think the right way to think about these negotiations at this point is that both sides are just trying to posture for who gets the blame.
Yes.
I mean, that's where we really are. Don't expect anything to act. This bill, the skinny bill from the GOP Senate caucus, is just messaging. The Democratic bill, the original Democratic Heroes Act, that was also just essentially a messaging bill. They never expected that the Senate would fully take up that exact metric. And so now we're just at the point where they want to try to jockey for who deserves the blame for failing to do anything as like an electoral sort of strategy for November.
And what is the real cost? And that's what we always have to focus on here. And this is from Joe Weisenthal over at Bloomberg. He flagged this chart, which is that that red line that you can see there, that is permanent job loss in the economy relative to previous recessions that we've had here in the United States. And you can actually see that permanent job loss is accelerating in a trend that is much higher and more steep than it was during the Great Recession in 2009. Obviously, we're only a couple months into this thing. We don't know if it's going to continue. It could, go V-shape or whatever, but that's not a good trend. You can see how it's continuing to plummet in that way. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but that's permanent job loss, as in people who do not expect to be employed in the next 6 months. It is so extraordinarily difficult in order to get those types of jobs back. To recreate a job in order to put somebody back into the economy and avoid temporary job loss is immensely hard. It takes years of good macroeconomic policy.
The longer that people are out of a job, the harder it is to get back into the workforce. That was something that we really saw as part of why the 2008 recession, aside from a totally bungled government response, why it was so hard to recover from is you had so many people who fell into that category of long-term unemployed. And we should also say here, like, we may wish it was otherwise, but what happens in this town really, really matters.
Yes.
That $600 unemployment plus up turned out to be the most important benefit. And in fact, one of the most successful anti-poverty programs that we have had in America in modern history. We can go ahead and throw the data up on the screen.
Look, that.
You can see the jump in income there. That's when that extra $600 a week comes into play. We all know that expired at the end of July. You know, there's been a piecemeal effort based on the president's executive order that has left most people out. And again, we're seeing those numbers of people who say, I can't pay my basic expenses going up and up and up. So again, once again, it is the story of the K-shaped recovery, and unfortunately for the people who are on the bottom part of that downward part of the K-shape, people here in Washington aren't hearing you. They don't see you. They're not taking you're not their big donors that they're taking their phone calls from.
More and more, I see 2008 happening all over again, which is that they did pass like this one bill, right? And then it happened. And what that did was very important, is it stopped it from a catastrophic collapse in which the top line GDP numbers would have plummeted. Now we're at a place where you can reasonably justify, as Larry Kudlow has, based on the top line numbers, that things are fine. Meanwhile, underneath the surface of all of America, things are hollowing out, the K-shaped recovery, people are trending down, consumer confidence is down, wages going down, permanent job losses accelerating. Then what's going to happen is that let's say Biden wins the presidency. He's going to offer some plan. The Republicans, like the Senate Republicans, are going to say, nope, block it. Then they're going to fight over the top line numbers. Biden will repeat what Obama did and be like, no, look at my recovery. I've created 10 million new jobs and they lost like 30 million. And then the Republicans will be like, no, actually it was President Trump's policies that are the ones. But nobody is actually going to do anything for you. And that's the real issue, right? Like that is exactly what happened in 2008.
Yes,
is that the bifurcation is going to continue to happen. They're going to quibble over why GDP is at, whatever percent that it is per annual growth, whenever it should, we shouldn't even be talking about that. We should be talking about distribution, but
and of course, there are people of all ages who are suffering, but the generational destruction that occurred in 2008 and is happening once again cannot be understated and is going to have massive ramifications for people for their entire lives.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.